Hey, good morning, Hannah. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for making time. Can you go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Well, I'm Hannah. I'm currently a senior at Harvard, and I study the history of science and also visual arts.
So if you could reflect back on your high school years,
hmm
what do you think were the greatest parts of your extracurricular development, your activities,
hmm
and also your character development that has helped you in life?
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna answer it backwards. So I think first, like character development from high school, what was really helpful of going to Milton was I think the environment and like the teachers there really stressed. It sounds cheesy, but, like, the importance of, like, learning for learning, and less so the end goal of kind of classes and tests and grades, but rather, really stressing the process of learning and, like, what that can do for me, and so I think it was at Milton when I really fell in love with learning new things, and then in terms of extracurriculars in high school, I spent a lot of time making art, and painting, and then also, like, music was a big part of life because my mom loved music, and then I think I also was very into, like, cultural organizations, I think coming from Shanghai, and being one of very few international students, that was something that I felt was really important to be able to stay, close to a lot of the traditions, and cultures that I grew up with.
You're graduating next month from Harvard
Mhm.
College, and that must be really exciting. So,
Yes.
um, yeah, I think learning for learning, exploring your intellectual curiosity,
Mhm.
and also really being passionate about things. I think one of the greatest parts about your application profile was it was very clear that you're passionate in music, in art, and in cultural diversity, and you had leadership positions within your school, right? Because life is full of ups and
Mhm.
downs, and of course, you've had a lot of success. But looking back, what were some of those hurdles that you had to overcome?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think, like, one of the biggest obstacles in going to high school where I did, was kind of just the complete change in, like, environment that I was in and, like, what I was used to. I think, like, moving from Shanghai, there was, like, a huge culture shock having never really lived in the States before. And then on top of that, I think, as I kind of touched upon previously a little bit, the entire way of learning that I was used to and the way of school that I was used to was completely kind of flipped upside down for me. I think in Shanghai, grades were really important, and it was very easy for me to get like a 98, a 99, or a 100 on like every test or essay. And so, kind of, that was my focus back when I was in Shanghai, just kind of trying to get the best grades I could. And that was like very easy to do if I just put in the time and kind of like memorized whatever materials were given to me. Whereas I think when I got to Milton, the way of learning was, well, first off, I think to get the same types of grades I did in Shanghai were like nearly impossible at Milton. I don't think I ever got anything above, or probably never got like 100, or like close to 100. And then at Milton, I would say like an example I always give is like in math class, like they would never give you um, like, we never had a textbook, we never had instructions of, like, how to solve problems, like, at SAS in Shanghai, it's like I would be given an example of how to do a problem and then taught how to solve it, and then I just had to memorize that process and, like, be able to regurgitate that back, whereas, like, Milton, it was like we were doing, like, proofs, and then you would be given, like, completely foreign information, and they didn't really care what you ended up with. They just wanted you to try your hand at like every type you could think of, and really build that like problem solving muscle. And so for me, that was like very challenging to work with because I was used to like just having to figure out, like memorize things that were taught to me. And for the first time, kind of, I was having to grapple with like huge unknowns, and that was frustrating for me, like not being able to get things on the first try and having to fail and fail over and over again, and then having teachers be like, just try again. And I think at first I hated it, and then I had to like really quickly change the way I was thinking about learning and thinking about school. And then I would say like in the admissions process, um the biggest challenge, I think, was really for me, like, one, figuring out, like, how to position myself, and I think that's where, like, you and, like, my parents really stepped in, and gave me advice, and support in those areas, just because I think when you go to a school like Milton, where everybody is striving for top schools in the country, it's really hard to stand out amongst that pool, but it's also really hard to feel like you are deserving of these spots, when all your peers are doing such amazing things. So yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on how Point Avenue helped you and your parents in working together to help you achieve your success?
For sure. I think, like, I mean, there are definitely, like, many factors that I probably am so unaware of. But I think from my side, one very tangible thing was that it helped me create a very rigorous schedule for, like, how to go about reaching such a seemingly unattainable goal. I think with applying to colleges, as I'm sure a lot of your clients know, like, there are so many different aspects, from, like, the written application to the tests to the teacher recommendations to planning out your extracurriculars, like, way in advance. And so I feel like, well, one, like, working with you guys, applying to, like, boarding school first was, like, a huge thing, of, like, learning how to study for the SSATs and, like, get those scores in. But then I think because I had that touch point with you guys so early on, it gave me a basis for how to think about planning out, like, my 3 years at Milton, in terms of, like, how to do that in the most productive way for college applications. And so when it did come time, like, junior year, I think I was provided, like, very clear instructions of, like, okay, this is when you start studying for the SAT or the ACT, and, like, these are the things you do to gear up for that.
So what do you think has helped you the most prepare for life at Harvard College, for university?
I actually think, like, the rigor of my high school really prepared me for this place, I think, and also, like, my initial transition from, like, Shanghai to a boarding school. Most of my peers here, I would say, had a really hard time freshman year in college, transitioning, um, to this kind of environment, and this pacing. But I think because I had spent 3 years at Milton prior, the transition for me actually felt very smooth, and very easy and doable. Um, and it's, like, crazy to think about, but I actually think my workload in college feels a lot less and, like, more manageable than it did in high school, for sure. Um, yeah, so I think it's just, like, the discipline that was instilled in me in high school, and also, like, the, ways of approaching learning and, like, education really prepared me for college. And so, yeah, I think, like, when everybody in college is, like, stressed about their, like, GPAs, and, like, their classes, I was kind of just like, I'm just gonna take classes I wanna take, and enjoy them for what they're offering, rather than constantly being on this, like, stress ball of.
Can you share with us more about what is life like as a Harvard College student? And then what are some of the ways you're taking advantage of the opportunities available to you there?
I think freshman year, it's definitely so exciting, but I do think people get caught up in kind of the everydayness of, I guess, like, school. Like, I think it's such a dream for people, and then when people step foot here freshman year, people kind of really quickly lose track of, like, where they are, because it just is your everyday. Um, and people get caught up so much in, like, their classes and, like, friends and extracurriculars that they forget to, like, appreciate where they are and be grateful for the opportunity of being where they are. But for me, I think freshman year was, I came in with, like, very low expectations, I guess, even though it obviously is such a dream school. I think because my transition into Milton was so tough for me, I came into college kind of, like, um trying to keep expectations low of, like, in terms of how much I was gonna like it, kept telling myself, like, it's just a school, and, like, all schools at the end of the day are gonna be, like, pretty similar. And I think for me, because I had kind of no expectations coming in, freshman year was so exciting for me. So, like, extracurriculars for me were, like, very stressful, because it's so exciting to get here. And then once you get here, you realize you're competing with like so many other very qualified applicants for like the same positions. And so like extracurriculars were like insanely competitive, even ones that seemingly didn't matter so much, like cultural clubs. Like you had to apply to get into those, you had to do interviews, and even a lot of my classes here I have to like interview and apply for, which
interviewing and applying for classes and
Mhm.
clubs sounds so intense. So two final questions here. Number one is was it worth it, all the hard work and sacrifice to get to where you are today as you're about to graduate college? And your
yeah
whole family is going to come to Cambridge and be a part of that very special ceremony. And then what final advice do you have for students and parents aspiring to follow in your footsteps, as you can reflect back on your past 8 years in high school and college? What advice do you have for these youngsters?
yeah I mean, to answer your first question, I definitely think it was worth it. I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity. Obviously, to have like worked with you, to have my parents' guidance and support, but also like I think to be here is something that a lot of people obviously like dream of and literally would kill for. And so it feels very surreal when I actually think about where I am, and the opportunities that I will. And in terms of advice, yeah, I don't know. I think one thing is just to keep like a big or like what's it called? Remind yourself of like the big picture, I guess. Like that has been really helpful for me, even like looking forward, in terms of like me graduating and figuring out next steps is like giving myself perspective of like where I am and like what I've already achieved and being grateful for what I have. Doing things from like a very like happy and like willing place rather than doing things because I feel like I have to or I'm being forced to, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And I just want to conclude here and say thank you to you for
Yeah.
making time. I think your message will inspire many, many families here. And just want to reiterate, I'm super happy for you and super proud of you. Please send your family my best regards.
Of
Thanks, Hannah.
course. Yeah, of course. Thank you.